Hi everyone, I'm Leanne and welcome to today's webinar. Today we're going to be looking at turbocharging Jenkins with Octopus Deploy. Our presenter is Derek Campbell. How are you today, Derek?
Hi, Leanne. I'm fantastic, thank you. I'm coming from a cold, wet and windy Scotland. What about yourself?
Yep, down in the south of England, it's pretty awful, pretty wet, but I'm nice and warm inside, so that's all right.
Yeah, it certainly is.
Cool. Okay, so I'm really interested in this topic, so let's get going. And first of all, let's take a look at some housekeeping. You won't need to record this session. We're going to record it, and once we've edited it and uploaded it, we'll email a link out to you around about 48 hours after the webinar ends. Also in that email, there'll be some links to relevant parts of the documentation and also the samples that Derek will have used in the webinar today. During the webinar, if you have any questions, you can put them either into the Q&A section in Zoom or into our community Slack, which can be found at octopus.com/Slack. Put the questions in there, and after Derek's finished his presentation, we'll pose those questions. Okay, without further ado, I'll hand over to you, Derek.
Thank you very much, Leanne, for your kind introduction. Okay, so let's jump into the agenda. What we're going to do is talk about what is continuous integration, and then we'll talk about continuous delivery. At that point, we're going to jump in and discuss the what and the why to use Jenkins, the what and why to use Octopus. And then as part of that, what we're going to do is pull both Jenkins and Octopus together at the same time and then run through a full build and deployment. And then at the end of the session, like Leanne said, we should have about 10 minutes for questions. Well, I'll be in the hot seat. So yeah, certainly put in your questions. Okay, so what is continuous integration, or commonly known as CI? This, funnily enough, has actually been about since I was a boy, surprisingly. And it's the practice of merging all your developers' working copies to a shared main line several times a day. It was originally, it came out in 1991 when I was just a boy, which is interesting because it still feels relatively new. However, it's almost 30 years old. What this generally means is if you're doing some, obviously if you've got more than one developer and they're checking in, then you're doing continuous integration in a way. Next up is continuous delivery. Continuous delivery is a software engineering approach in which development teams produce software in shorter cycles. What this does is this ensures that the software can be reliably released and deployed at any time throughout the development phase. The main aim and mission behind this is just it looks at building, testing, and releasing software with greater speed and frequency. Traditionally, development could take between 3 months to 5 to 6 years, and what would often happen is you get towards the end and the product really wasn't there. This is why you use CI in the CD pipelines, which is your continuous integration and your continuous delivery. Okay, so Jenkins. It's a continuous integration tool. It can also do a whole bunch of different things, and it's the most popular CI tool in the world, widely used with millions of installations worldwide. One of the things that I really like about Jenkins, and I've been using it on and off since about 2013, 2014, is that it's really extendable. It's got over 1,500 plugins on the Jenkins site. There is a cloud version, which is paid for and hosted by CloudBees. You can also get the on-premise version, which is free to install, which is great. Jenkins was first released in 2005. It wasn't branded as Jenkins. It went through a few different names, Hudson, etc. And then it was officially launched as Jenkins in 2011. And a fun fact about Jenkins is roughly about 1 in 8 packages, or 12.5% of packages that Octopus receives globally are from a Jenkins server, which is, I thought it's really cool. So let's jump in and have a quick look at Jenkins. This is Jenkins. What you've got here on the left-hand side is some configuration options. And then over here is you got your jobs or your tasks. One of the things that I really like about Jenkins is you can separate it into different, helps with a login. What you can do here with the views is you can set up your own views. You can have shared views. The reason I like this is, as you can imagine, as teams pile on into Jenkins, then there's going to be a lot, probably hundreds, potentially thousands of tasks. And what you can do is create a new view for each of your projects or whatever your requirements are here. And you can come in and select Edit View. And then from here, you can select the task. In this instance, I'm going to keep all, mainly because it's quite handy. I'll talk about these more in further detail and further down the line. So let's jump in and have a look at configuring Jenkins. And just so you're aware, Jenkins can run on both Linux, all flavors, and also Windows. In this instance, I'm using Windows. So that's just something to be aware of as part of today's webinar. So we went into the configure system section under manage Jenkins. You're likely going to spend quite a bit of time here initially. The main reason is you'll need to configure the system. There'll be things that you'll be adding like URLs, and then there's a whole bunch of different configuration that you need to be aware of. For instance, there's some plugins that I've enabled installed here. It's like mask passwords. So there'll be some configuration options around here. If you've got some Maven project configuration, you've got some usage statistics, and this is actually where you configure the connections to Octopus Deploy. As you can see here, we've got a server ID, we've got the URL, and then an API key. I'll show you later on how to generate the API key. But for instance, what you could do here is add multiple different connections to different Octopus servers using different API keys, which have different permissions. And what you can do is, you can really, you can configure a lot of these different connections. You may find that have projects or spaces, etc., that have different users that you want to use, and then from there you'll need to generate a different API key. And again, I'll show you that later on. So you specify your URL, some system admin email address, and then from here there's also things like connections to GitHub, GitHub enterprise servers. Again, these are only presented when you install those plugins, and I'll show you plugins in just a moment. What I've got here as well is some NuGet, a NuGet.exe. Again, similar to what I've shown you earlier on with Octopus, you can have different versions of NuGet based on your requirements and just add different environments, different versions of NuGet. The rest of it's fairly self-explanatory. If you want to use Subversion as well, there's a whole bunch of options around this, and it's something definitely to be aware of. So let's go back to Jenkins. The next bit that we're going to have a look at, you're going to spend some time setting up things like security. We're going to skip over that for just to keep it nice and short. With this, the next section is the global tool configuration. This is where you can, much similar to the previous area, you can configure a lot of different things. Like for instance, what I've got here is the Git installation. In this instance, I've just added Git to the system path so that I don't have to do that, like mention the entire path. There's things here like there's some Gradle. I'm not doing anything with Gradle today. However, I am doing things with MS Build. That has been installed as a path into the path as well. And then again, we've got octo.exe. This is also where you configure. So as you can see, I've configured most of these under the tools area in the OS. So just to cover octo.exe, this is something that you will have to do. With the background, just to give you some context, there has been a Jenkins plugin for Octopus for some time now. However, it was not under the control of Octopus, and we've taken ownership over that over the past 6 months. And on that, what we've done is we've went and then given it a similar functionality to our other build server plugins. So the previous one, we used to make it a call all over the API. However, in this instance, we're going to use octo.exe, and this comes with built-in steps, which have commands, and I'll talk you through that in just a moment. But yeah, so the previous version, you could do that. However, this one is much more feature-rich. And you can also add things like Docker as well down at the bottom. Okay, so that's pretty much Jenkins in a nutshell. Let's jump back to the slide deck. So, what is Octopus Deploy? Octopus Deploy is a deployment automation tool. You can use it to automate all of your deployments to Windows servers, Linux servers, Kubernetes clusters, Azure Platform as a Service targets, all that sort of good stuff. You can use it to promote releases between environments from dev to test, test to production. You may have pre-prod in there as well. And one of the key features of Octopus is you only ever actually configure the deployment process once, and that's used across multiple different environments. With other systems, often what can happen is you have to configure it each for dev, test, pre-prod, and production. It's it's prone to error, and it may be slightly different. And the benefit of having that single deployment process is that it's repeatable, reliable, and it really gives you that consistent deployment. Well, again, another thing that I really liked is that Octopus was actually rewritten to make it API first. So anything that you can do within the user interface, you can also do over the API. We also have a cloud platform. We launched this on AWS back in July 2018. And we have only recently relaunched V2 of it. And so you can actually have in the cloud, and you don't really have to manage any of the infrastructure. V2 runs on Azure Kubernetes service, which is really cool. If you want to read about that, we've got a whole bunch of stuff on our blog. I definitely recommend that. There's some time there, and there's a lot of really great learning. And what we often see is we're definitely seeing people pick up cloud more often. However, we also still see that predominantly people are either self-hosting and it might be their office, could well be a data center, could well be a private cloud or public cloud as well. And one of the things that we launched on the 1st of September 2019 was a free starter edition. With that, you can deploy up to 10 deployment targets. We may have a very interesting announcement on cloud as well over the next week or so. I can't see anything just yet, but certainly keep an eye out on that if you're looking for some free Octopus Deploy. Okay, let's jump into Octopus. What you've got down here on the left-hand side is projects. Projects tend to be things which are shipped together at the same time. So for instance, if you're shipping and deploying large self-contained monolithic applications, you may find that you only have 50 projects. However, if you're using a lot of microservices applications, you may find that you get several hundred, potentially thousands. And what this is basically where you can store all your project settings. What you've got here across the top is the environments. In this instance, we're using dev, test, pre-prod, and production. One of the things that I find most useful is the dashboards or dashboards. Because as you can see here, you can see that version 2019.12.11.68 is in dev and test. However, you have a different version in pre-prod and production. But when you jump into the project, you'll see that there is also another dashboard which gives you much more information. You can see that there's been many versions, where they are, what time they were released. You may find that you have a unsuccessful deployment as well. So this is something certainly I find really useful. This is where you create your deployment process. I don't want to spend too much time here, as I will talk you through the deployment process in a little while. And also, just so you're aware, we do also have a Octo 101 Getting Started webinar where we take this application and similar applications and configure the entire deployment process and run through a deployment there. Okay, so variables, this is where things that will generally change between environments. You know, think about it like a SQL connection string or a MySQL connection string. Ultimately, your username, your password, your server address should change. I'd be hopeful that it changes. You know, the data, all this changes as you go, and I will show you this in greater detail in just a moment. So let's jump over to infrastructure. What we've got here is this is where our, funnily enough, our infrastructure lives, and you can add in our deployment targets. So if you select add deployment target, and then you can see that we've got windows, we've got listening tentacles, polling tentacles. The difference really is that it's just an agent that sits on the server, and the difference between them is really just the direction of the communication. A listening tentacle is where Octopus connects into the tentacle, and then polling is when the tentacle connects to the Octopus server. And one thing just to be aware of is we have launched full features listening and polling tentacles in Linux. This has only been out in the past few months. So if you are using a lot of Jenkins and you're doing, say, .NET Core or PHP or Java and you're hosting on Linux, then certainly have a look at the listening and polling tentacles for Linux. Additionally, we do still have the SSH connection as well. If you want, you can also deploy to Mac. What you can also do is from here, you can set up connections to Azure Web Apps, Service Fabric clusters, and so forth. And you use, instead of using an agent, because obviously you can't install anything on that, what you do use is an Azure service principal, and that you use that as a way to authenticate. Additionally, you have Kubernetes clusters, offline package drops, and cloud regions. Okay, so that's Octopus. Next up is a CI/CD pipeline, or continuous integration and continuous delivery pipeline with Jenkins and Octopus. I generally find this diagram fits most situations. You've normally got a developer who's normally working on their machine. You know, if they're following the continuous integration, they're committing their code several times a day. And then at that point, they're committing that into a source control. That could be something like GitHub, GitLab, SVN, etc. And you can configure Jenkins to monitor the source control for any check-ins. Much like that, if you're using something like Gitflow, then certainly you could also have some feature branches being monitored and then run through your entire deployment process. So Jenkins monitors, it grabs a new code, it builds it, it runs a test, and then it creates the artifacts. At that point, you then push the artifacts over to Octopus, and then you can actually, you'll normally find that the development will be triggered automatically. It will just be triggered and the deployment will happen automatically. The main reason is you'll normally want the latest code at any time during the day. Again, you can also have things like time-based triggers where you could do this each morning at, say, 7 a.m. And then take anything from dev that was there the day before and push that up to QA as well. But more often than not, a tester will come in, they'll promote it to QA or test, and then run through their testing. And then lastly, once they've given the thumbs up, you can then get a web admin and a DBA who normally promotes it to production. You can automate all of this as well. You know, certainly if you want to run things like testing in between, you know, security testing, unit testing, integration testing, you can also do this in regression testing. And then you could have a fully automated pipeline that will take you all the way through to production. Okay, so it's time for the demo. I just want to provide some context first. Let's jump over. And this, no need to take down the URL. We'll send this over as part of the follow-up email. This is OctoFX. OctoFX is a sample application that Octopus has built. The main reason that we built this is just to demo how to deploy a multi-tier application. The context here is that OctoFX is a fictitious London-based online foreign exchange company. Customers, both retail and businesses alike, can sign up online on the website for a user account, and they can then log in and then trade currencies using the platform. The OctoFX consists of 3 separate things. It's a full framework.net MVC website, which we'll be deploying to an Azure web app. What that is underpinned by a MS SQL database, which stores user information and the current exchange rate. And lastly, we're also going to be deploying a Windows service. The Windows service will be configured so that as the exchange rate fluctuates during the day, it then is tasked to update the database and then let the users who are logged in know about the new exchange rate. Okay, so you've got the context there about OctoFX. Next, what I want to do is just briefly go over the infrastructure involved. So in dev, what you've got here is Jenkins and Octopus, and you're doing the deployment via Octopus. As you'll see here, if you follow arrows, we're coming down and we're deploying to the dev web app, and that's the OctoFX website. We're also then deploying the rate service, which is hosted on a Windows VM. The one that may be a little bit confusing is this one. What we're doing here is we've got a tentacle installed on a Bastion, also known as a jump box, or even it could also be on a management node. From there, you're telling Octopus to trigger the tentacle to then connect directly into the SQL server and deploy the development database. The main reason we do it like this is mostly it's down to security. You don't want to be opening up your SQL port to too many locations. So for instance, you can have multiple tentacles on the same jump box, and that can have different access to different SQL servers as well. So that's development. Test is much like you will see in the real world as well. It's much like dev. It's just a single web app. Again, you're deploying your rate service, and then you're doing your same test database deployment. Production. As we mentioned earlier on, obviously the deployment process is the same. However, in this instance, we are actually seeing that we've got the Bastion or jump box still doing the database. It's also still doing the rate service, but in this instance, it's actually going to be deploying to 2 separate web apps, and I'll show you that as part of this. So that's the infrastructure we're deploying. So from there, as you can see, we're deploying OctoFX to 3 separate environments. One thing I just want to be upfront about, within Octopus, what we're actually doing is we are sharing the SQL server and the VM. The main reasons for that is just to keep the cost down. But yeah, you can also separate all those out. Okay, so let's jump in. We've got Jenkins. Everything is sunny. They love Jenkins do love a weather icon. So from here, let's jump into the CI. This is where most of the work is done. And one of the things I actually really like about Jenkins is it's all in a single window. So there's not lots of clicking about. It's just a single window that you scroll, and depending on what plugins you install, then from the different plugins that you're going to be installing, different things will be activated. So one thing to be aware of here is obviously you've got some general sections, discard all builds, etc. First section, much like most CI servers, is the ability to point it to a repository. As you can see, I'm just pointing it to the OctoFX repository. You can also use it SVN as well. Then next up is build triggers. You can trigger things that builds remotely from scripts, build on NuGet updates, and all that sort of good stuff. Even periodically, GitHub branches, and then also POL SCM as well. One of my favorite tick boxes is this one. I'm a big fan of this, and I generally recommend it in almost every single one build. It's delete workspace before build starts. The main reason I like this is just in case there's any sort of issues hanging about, then what we've got here is just purge out the entire directory, and then from there, you can do a fresh build. Okay, so people who are familiar with .NET, you'll probably be fairly familiar with the next few steps, mostly because every time that you're building something in Visual Studio, it's almost identical. What you've got here, the first one is the NuGet restore. We're just executing a Windows batch command. We're specifying the location of NuGet.exe. We're then doing the restore. And then at that point, we're actually specifying the solution, which you'll see if you come back in, you come into source. And then there is the solution file that we're building. This only happens after the git clone. So from there, next up, we're specifying the workspace, and then the source, and then OctoFX solution. This bit is really important. From here, what you're going to do is specify a full rebuild. The benefit here is it's a full rebuild. It's not something that's just built on top of previous builds. So definitely recommend doing this. Okay, we're then specifying the configuration, which is release. The release is actually, this is quite important. The main thing is we're using new spec files to create our NuGet packages, and that's part of the solution. So definitely check that out if you're not familiar with it. With the new spec, it's basically telling what we're going to be doing when we're generating the NuGet package. We're specifying to run Octopack. Octopack is an open source packaging tool that Octopus created some time ago now. It's really great for packaging up full framework. However, .NET Core, there are other solutions for that. Then lastly, we're specifying the Octopack package version, which will be appended to each of the packages. Okay, so from here, as you can see, we have restored the NuGet packages, and then at that point, we're then going to build the Visual Studio project. Once the Visual Studio project will then create the packages. And what we've done here in this particular step is we're using the octo.exe, the Octopus CLI. And then from here, we're specifying the Octopus demo server. We're using the Jenkins space. Then we're specifying the location of the NuGet packages. As you can see, we've got octofx.database, octofx.trading website, and then the rate service, and then using build number just as a way to release. So at that point, you've packaged everything up. It's then pushed it. You've then pushed the packages to Octopus. And then lastly, here, as part of the build step, you're then going to push the build information. You can push, like for instance, you can, if you're using Jira or GitHub, you can actually pass the comments over directly into Octopus and then create release notes off the back of that. So again, we've got octofx.database, then we're pushing the build information for the trading website, and then lastly for the rate service. Okay, so over to post-build actions. The next step, we're going to create the release. This again is very straightforward. We're just using the default CLI. We've got the Octopus server. We've got the space. We're specifying the project name and then the release number. You can also specify the channel. Channels is a way for you to bypass your normal life cycle. So say, for instance, if you have an urgent bug fix, and you don't want to go through dev and test, and you want it to go into pre-prod and then promote to production, that's channels. Okay, so again, what we've got here is some release notes, which I was mentioning earlier on, and the release notes are from the source control. And then what you can do is you can actually deploy this release after it's created. So within the same step, you select this, and then you can just do your deployment to development if you wish. I generally don't tick that box. The main reason I don't like that is I like that, in real life, you normally find that there'll be several bits that you want to do integration testing, unit testing, and suddenly you've got an 18 command project. Sorry, you've got 18 steps, and say for instance step number 14 breaks. You don't want to run through all 18 steps again. You just want to rerun step 14. So that's a way I like separating it out. We discuss this all the time. Each of different approaches and different pros and cons. So certainly that's something to be aware of. And one of the things that we've got here is build other projects. So what we've done here is we've created the CI aspect of it. And then from here, we've then said, hey, go ahead, once this is all done, go ahead and run the projects. In this instance, it's deployed to dev. Okay, so let's go back to Jenkins and then have a look at deploy to dev. This is very straightforward, and steps 2, 3, and 4 are very similar. The only difference is the environment that they're deploying to. As you can see, you've got nothing really configured, no source code management, no build triggers, no build environments. It is one step and one step only. It's one of the steps that is activated as part of the Octopus plugin. So you've got your CLI. Again, you've got the same server, same space, same project, same release version. The only difference here is you're specifying the environment that you're deploying to. So that's great. And then one of the things I just want to take just a moment and just explain is this button down here. It's called the Show Deployment Progress button. I pretty much always tick this, apart from one exception. I like what this does is that when you're running through your deployment, it'll pull all the logs back from Octopus and show you in Jenkins. So if you find that you're running, if you're letting developers or other people run this, and if you want them to see the progress, but don't want to necessarily give them access to Octopus, this gives them the ability to see what's happening in Octopus. There are some occasions where you don't want to tick it. Mostly that's in production. The main reason is you'll normally have some form of approval. Approvals can take several seconds to, 6 months. So for instance, if you're running through an approval and it can take, say, 3 months, then it's going to time out and show a failed deployment. So unticking this whilst it goes through approval process, as this only stays active for 10 minutes, it will just keep the stay as correct. Okay. So next one is deploy to test. Configure. Okay. Come down. Everything here is just the same. We've got the CLI, same server. The only difference is we're deploying to test. And then again, we've got the button ticked just to pull the logs through. And then step number 4. Once we've got this, it'll then kick off the deployment to prod. Lastly, what we're going to do here is we'll go into step 4. This is very similar. Into configure. All the same, nothing really is different. The only difference here is we're specifying environment, and we don't have this box ticked. And again, there's no post-build actions. But you could, for instance, add in a project to run through security testing, load testing, all that sort of good stuff. Okay, one thing that I just realized I actually haven't shown you is the plugins. So when you're installing the Octopus plugin, you can actually jump in to plugins.jenkins.io and then search it for Octopus. For instance, there's Octopus Deploy. You can download and install. You can also come into our website, come into octopus.com/downloads, and then there's the Jenkins plugin here. This will take you to the plugins page. Additionally, as I was mentioned earlier on, when you're running your commands, you need to use octo.exe. And what you've got here is different versions. So if you did want to, in my instance, I've installed the 32-bit Windows version. If you wanted to run it on Red Hat or Debian or Ubuntu 14.04 or Ubuntu 16.04, then you can download the appropriate one here. But yeah, so jump over to here. You've got your Octopus Deploy. You've got a whole bunch. I just want to take a moment just to show you. Say, for instance, you want to run a Selenium script. Here you go. Lots of different options. You want to run unit tests. There we go. There's lots of different options. And then with that, you can just put, say, MS build. There we go. And one thing to see that, you can also come in to manage plugins. And one of the things that I like here is it's really easy to update your plugins, which is great. And then you can come in, and then under here, you've got all your available ones. So if it's .NET, there's your .NET section. You come down, you've got Android, and to be honest, I would probably break my finger scrolling. There's that many. Obviously, that's the thing. There's over 1,500. So as you can see, if you go into the installed section, I've installed a bunch of plugins, MS Build being one of them, Git, NuGet, LDAP, and then MS Build, Octopus Deploy, Pipeline, etc. So yeah, there's lots of different stuff. So that's where the plugins live. So, okay, so I haven't actually went in and showed you the Octopus configuration, but what I'm going to do is kick off a build and deploy. And then I'll talk you through that just to keep us under the time. So there we go. There we go. As we've got here, OctoFX is kicked off. So as that's happening, I'm just going to pop down and pop into Octopus now and talk you through the configuration in Octopus. Okay, so let's switch over. As I mentioned earlier on, I was doing this in the Jenkins space. Spaces is a way to hard wall off different versions of Octopus. So as you can see, we've got the Jenkins space. You can actually just spin up spaces very quickly. It's almost its own Octopus server. So for instance, if you, I've got this one that I use just as a quick demo. If you went in and done that, there we go. It's almost like you've installed Octopus for the first time. But let's jump back to Jenkins. Okay, so this is its own dedicated space. You can see here that we've got OctoFX. We've got some working deployments, which is good. Actually, it's already created a release as well, which is fantastic. But what we'll do is we'll come back to this in just a second. So jump in and we'll talk about the deployment process. So like I mentioned earlier on, deployment process is something you configure once per project. There are ways that you can even use it and more. However, that's a multi-tenant application. And we do have some really great webinar on that by Ryan Russell. It's definitely something to check out if you want to look into multi-tenancy. So as I mentioned earlier on, there is an approval step. And this is a manual, it's called a manual intervention step. I love this step. It's one of my most used. It's pretty much the first thing I do in a project, even before I started at Octopus. The main reason was coming in and setting this up was just hey, just wait a minute. Production, are you sure? Is this good? And this is a good way for you to build that in. And you can have it so that it only runs for production or pre-production or whatever your requirements are. You can actually have it just to run on every single one as well. So that's something to be aware of. And as you can see here, there's instructions. So you can even use, you can actually use variables as well. I've recently saw where customers were using contact details, so quite often the approval required can be from a customer, it can be a customer or a client, it can be from your boss, a project manager, and so forth. So you could put all this information in the instructions. And this is where you specify the responsible team for this. Don't do what Derek does and select everyone. The only reason I'm doing this is just purely for today's webinar. But so for instance, if you're doing a database deployment, then you maybe want to do a database approval, DB as approver. But that's that section. Next up, the next 4 steps are very, very similar. In this instance, these 4 steps are actually all community contributed steps. This wasn't actually something that Octopus have released. This is just people who had this requirement have wrote these steps, and they're all very, very similar. And what we're doing is we're setting up we're creating the SQL user if it doesn't exist. We're then creating the database if it doesn't exist. Then we're going to create the database user if it doesn't exist, and then add the database user to the role. They're all very, very similar, and they heavily use variables down here. So as you can see here, we're using brace curly bracket syntax. This is octostash or variable substitution within Octopus. And this is something, what I generally find that I'm a big fan here is it just makes everything a lot easier because you can substitute things in. So each one has a different admin user or admin password. Then you're setting up the user using the admin user and password. So all these are very, very straightforward. Just so you're aware, we do have a Octo 101 session where we configure this and other applications from scratch. That is definitely one to check out if you want to jump in and see this, just this bit of it. Then next up, we're doing we're doing all the SQL work. So yeah, steps 2 to 5 are all very, very similar. They're just, some of them have different variables that they use. Next up, we're deploying the database, which I think is, database deployment is something definitely we should see more and more people doing. However, this is it's based on deploy a package step. You're then running it on OctoFX database. That isn't the database server. That is actually a jump box. And then, as you can see here, we're specifying octofx.database from the built-in feed. This is where you can configure features. Like I was saying, this, for instance, if you want to substitute variables and files, which we will have done on the other steps, you can enable this, or you can do configuration, variables, custom installation, directories, and so forth. Okay, so next up is the deploy the website. And we're basing this on the deploying Azure Web App step within Octopus. What we've got here is this is running on behalf of OctoFX Web, which is the target role for all of our web servers. We're using a rolling deployment. Rolling deployments are a way for you to run multiple steps. In this instance, we've set up a rolling deployment. It's purely for production. As part of production, we'll deploy to prod 1. Take that out of the load balancer, deploy to prod 1, and then add that back in, deploy to prod 2, and then that's that. Again, we're specifying the package. There are some deployment options down here, but these are all just the default. So on to the next step. And certainly not that, it may be last, but it's certainly not least. And this is the deploy a Windows service step. What we've got here is this is going to run on the rate service server. It is just a single server. We're specifying the package to use and the built-in feed. What you've then got is the naming of the Windows feature. So as we're naming, as this is a shared virtual machine, what we're doing here is we're appending a variable of octopus.environment name. So when we do this for development, then it's going to say octofx-development, then for test-test, and so forth. There's some options around here on, certainly some arguments, and then where you'll find the executable. Some options around startup. You can run it as local system, network service, custom user. You can set up things like, how the state will happen. Is it automatic or delayed, manual, disabled, etc. Okay, so that's the deployment process. Let's jump in and have a look at the variables. So this is the variables section. What you've got here is you've got the variable's name on the left-hand side, and then the variable. In this instance, this is actually a sensitive variable, as you can see here. You can store Azure, AWS accounts, certificates, and also text. And you can use scoping. So you can scope to environments, target roles, targets, and deployment steps, and even channels as well. So as you can see, we've got passwords for the admin password for development, one for production and one for test. We've got different admin users. We've got, again, we could keep these, if you weren't sharing infrastructure, you could just be admin user. And then just, because that's one of the things, if you don't scope it, then it's scoped to all environments. Again, you've got the octofx.database name, the database password, and then the database role. And then the server, again, this you probably find that in most organizations and in most projects, you would have different servers for different environments. Next up then would be the database user, again, scoped to different environments. And lastly, and certainly probably the coolest one, is variables within variables. So this is the SQL connection string. And from what it does is it pulls down the server, the database name, the user ID, and then lastly the password based on your the role that you're deploying to. So that's variables. Let's just jump over to infrastructure very quickly. Let's discard changes because I may break my deployment process. Let's go into environments. And as you can see here, if we step out development, we've got a few. So we've got the Bastion box here, which has got the OctoFX database, target role. You get OctoFX dev, which has got the web rate service. As you can see, these are all very similar. And then what we've got here down is prod 1 and prod 2. So let's go back to the dashboard. Okay, so we've actually had a successful deployment. So if you come back very briefly to Jenkins, and then if we just refresh the page, you should see that everything, this has happened 9 minutes, 8 minutes, 6 minutes, 5 minutes. So that entire process took roughly 4 minutes, which is fantastic. The only thing is it hasn't actually done the deployment to production. It's just kicked it off. So the first thing we're going to do just now is we're going to approve the production deployment. I know that probably sounds a little bit backwards, but the idea here is I can show you the other environments whilst I'm showing you, whilst production is deploying. So I'm going to assign it to me, and I'm going to, it says you've got some notes here. Please check everything's correct and approve. Deployment is approved. Please proceed. Select proceed. And then from there, what's going to happen is deployment is going to happen to production. So I just want to take this moment. So as you can see here, deployment to dev in Jenkins. Let's go and have a look at the console output. So for the deploy to dev, this has pulled in all of the logs from Octopus. So it's went through step 2, SQL, it's creating the user. As you can see, it goes through and it's pulled everything through. However, what you can also do is come in and have a look at development as well, just to double check. Come in, you can see your task summary, which is for the most part really useful when you get a successful one. But you can also come in and do deployments to. Sorry, you can also check your logs here. So as you can see, it's created the SQL user, it's created the database, it's created the database user, it's added the database user to the role, it's acquired the packages, it's deployed the database, which is great. It's then deployed the web app, and then lastly done the Windows service. And one thing that I really like about this step is it gives you the URL, which is really great because it's easy. And you can come in, you can get a quote, and you can see here that we've got a working environment to development, which is great. Just one thing I wanted to show you. Sorry, if we come back to Jenkins, you'll see here that we've also had a full build as well. It's pushed all this over to Octopus. Oh, sorry, that's the wrong section. Okay, so we'll have a look. You can have a look at the console output. So as you can see, it's went through all this. It's done all the git clone. It's done the NuGet restore. It's then built it and then created the NuGet package and then passed them over. But what we've got, just so you're aware, I just wanted to get the version number. We come down. We've got deploy database 2019 12.17. If we now come over to the library, come into packages, we've got the database, the rate service, and the trading website with 2019 12.17, which is great. Okay, so let's go back to the dashboard. So we've got this working in development. Let's jump into test, which is great. Into task log. Again, everything is looking good here. Don't want to spend too much time. Everything's good. I'm coming in to click on, yep, there we go, octofx-test.azurewebsites.net. Get a quote. Everything, it looks like it's hunky-dory. Excellent. And then lastly, jump over to production. Same idea. The task summary should be good. You've got the task log. Everything's looking good here. This is fantastic. And then this is where you'll see. So you've got deploying Azure Web App, and then you've got this one for running on behalf of OctoFX-Prod1, and then running on behalf of OctoFX-Prod2. So we'll open this up here, and we've got a working website. So let's get a quote. This is fantastic. And lastly, we've got Prod2 as well. And you can also script out all the infrastructure, so you can remove things and pre-stage them for load balancers as well. Okay, so as you can see, what we've done here today is we've taken the source control of OctoFX. We've run through the build. Sorry, we've restored the NuGet packages. we've built the solution, created the NuGet packages, pushed the NuGet packages to Octopus, created the release. Then from there, from step 2, and that's from step 1. Step 2, we've then deployed it to dev, we've then deployed it to test, and then deployed it to production. And then from there, what we come back to Octopus, and there we go. That's everything. Okay, Leanne, over to you. Any questions?
Hi, Derek. Thank you. That was a really excellent presentation. Yes, we do have some questions. So one that's popped up several times, actually, is does Octopus Deploy Jenkins plugin support pipelines? And if not, is there a timeline for that feature?
I believe it does, but what I'll have to do is just double check. What I'll do is I'll try and get the answer for that. I think it does, but it's I've not set it up, so it's something I'll come back and answer in the email.
Okay, great, thank you. There's another one here from Casey Daniel. So they've been using octo.exe directly and passing an environment through as a parameter. So is that something that could be used using the Octopus plugin?
Yeah, I mean, really, what the Octopus plugin is, it's effectively making it easier. You can, like, that was the other approach. So if you had octo.exe installed on Jenkins, you could script that out, and then from there, just obviously use so for instance, if you go to octo.exe, there we go. So effectively, you could just script this out yourself in Jenkins. So if you wanted to, say for instance, put create release, all we're doing here, so you come in, you've got create release here. All that we're really doing is, if we come in, and we'll come into the one that we've done here, is create release. There we go. So as you can see, it's just a way, so it basically means that you don't have to roll your own version of it. That's what the difference is.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so there's a couple of questions we've had about the versions of Octopus Deploy and Jenkins that are required. I think what we'll do is we'll put that on the email follow-up, just to be absolutely
clear
to
be honest, the version shouldn't really matter. I mean, as long as with the plugin, again, there's no interaction directly with the plugin in the server. As long as the command is supported with Octopus, then it should be fine. And 1 second, let me just see. Octopus. One of the things, just got here. So yeah, you basically need to have dependencies. Just, I think, actually, one more. You can't. Oh, just one thing. Octopus Talk. We do have a really handy guide as well. Something just to be aware of. We come to documentation, and then we do Jenkins. Oops, if I can spell. You can actually, a really handy guide here, as this will actually take you through the full configuration as well. That's just something to be aware of. And I think then, I think it should be fine. I think it's, if we come into the version, then let's see, actually, here's the information. Version. Yeah, I think let's just double check and we'll come back to, we'll send it out in the email.
Yep. And another one, what is the advantage of using Jenkins instead of GitLab pipelines?
That is really down to personal choice. That is something, I just put that down to personal choice. Really, pipelines is something, Bitbucket has the same concept as well. So from a build server, it's definitely something we're seeing as well. I mean, Azure DevOps has that as well. It's really, the difference is probably budget and personal preference.
Okay, awesome. Sorry, just checking through the other ones. I think that's it. There's a couple of others. What we might do is answer those offline.
Get them to email advice@octopus.com as well, for anything particular as well. That would that might help out as well.
Yep. So you can contact us through our Slack channel and also on on there. Okay, fantastic. So just also in addition to what Derek's just shown us, I just wanted to show you some resources that we have available. So first of all, octopus.com/events is a fairly new page that we have on the website, which gives an overview of any upcoming events, which might be webinars, it might be conferences we're attending, and keep popping back to it because it does get updated fairly regularly. We've also got our documentation and also our videos. So octopus.com/videos is our YouTube channel. So that has recordings of previous webinars, some TLDRs, some shorter videos, longer videos. It's a really, really excellent resource, and I'd encourage you to take a look at that. And also, you can get a free starter edition of our Octopus, and go along, sign up, have a go, have a play, and email us at advice.octopus.com if you've got any questions. Okay, so as we mentioned at the start, we are recording this webinar, and we'll send out the link with all of the resources, answers to some of those questions, and a link to that email in about 48 hours. And a reminder of our upcoming webinars. Next Wednesday at this time, there's a Octopus 101 Getting Started with myself. And just after Christmas, probably towards the end of January, is a webinar on our new feature, Runbooks, which is really exciting. I'd encourage you to come along and take a look at that. Excellent. So lots of great topics coming up. Hopefully you'll join us. Thanks again, Derek. That was a really awesome presentation. And thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you very much.